Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, I'm so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Tim Blake Nelson to talk all about his latest movie, Old Henry. And I wanted to start by diving into a bunch of your preparation process because you inadvertently actually had a lot of time to prepare for this role because production got pushed back because of COVID a couple times. And you've kind of described the first 6 months or so that you were working on this character as what you call table work, which is a lot of the research and really figuring out the voice of the character, and was just really interested, particularly because there is actually, without giving away anything, there is actually a lot of material on the character that you're playing to be able to research. And so, what were the most useful tools for you during that time period?
Well, I guess reading the history of the character, and there was one particular book that was far more useful than any other. And then there's one photograph of the man, and just sitting with that patiently and letting it seep in and inform me. And that sounds very gauzy when I put it that way, but I guess I've been doing this a while now. And early on in my career, I made the mistake of making choices too early, almost out of fear, because I'd get a role and be frightened I wasn't going to be able to pull it off. And so the sooner I could get a toehold, the better I'd feel, just in terms of my confidence in playing the parts. But that deprived me of choices, because as soon as you decide you're going to play a role in a particular way, you're just by definition, you're cutting off opportunities that, for other choices. And so I've just taken a much slower approach as I've gotten older, to the extent to where, I wish that I could play some of the parts I played early on with a more patient, having had a more patient attitude for finding the character. And with this case, I just was able to take my time and think about how the character stood and moved and all that stuff, which is probably not so interesting to an audience, but is, as an actor, why I want to do this. It's every character posits, a set of problems that you have to figure out, and that's the fun of it. I've almost gotten to where I prefer the preparation to the doing.
And there's also, with this character in particular, there's both the dialect and the dialogue delivery, because you're looking at the location of it being a Southern accent. You're also looking at the specificity of the time period. And this is also a man who's very measured in what he says, because he's very careful about what he reveals about himself. And so how did you land upon what his voice was going to be as a character?
Very, very slowly. And also, interacting with the director of the movie. I had a slightly different notion for what I wanted to do, and I mooted that with the director, and he said, you know, I imagined something different. And so I went back and found something that worked for me, but also most importantly worked for him, because it's his movie. And that's an actor's responsibility, particularly in film, which is a director's medium, not an actor's medium, is to make sure you're giving your director the color he wants. So the motivating, or I guess the animating principle toward all my choices on this part were about concealment and reticence, because this is a guy who wants others to know as little about him as possible. And that includes his own son, with whom he's living on a daily basis, just the two of them, because the mother and wife are gone. And so, I guess to put it in technical terms, it came to be about holding the sound as far back into myself as possible, as opposed to keeping it forward. It's more of a shielded and as I said, reticent approach to making sound, but also movement. That became the governing principle, yielding up as little as possible. And that's both an intuitive process and a very strategic one and thought out one. And you have to combine those, because if it's utterly strategic, then your performance looks like it's being manufactured, and if it's utterly intuitive, then you can lack discipline. And so you've got to meet somewhere in the middle, and that takes time, and luckily I had it.
And with the fact that you're bringing up that this is a character who, even to his own son, doesn't really reveal his true self and details about himself, is there a challenge to playing a character like that in a way where you still are finding the small inflections and the small details that give those little hints, but that don't cross over into fully giving everything away? Because when you go back and once you see the ending and you go back and you look at those earlier scenes, there's a lot of detailing kind of peppered in throughout your performance where you start to really see that earlier on as well.
I think ultimately had spent so much time with the material and also working on the material with the wonderful writer director of this movie, Posse that by the time it was on set, I could just kind of let the writing and the work with my scene partners and the preparation I did lead me. That's the beauty of prep. You spend so much time preparing for a role so that when you're on set, you're not worrying about any of the choices you've made. You just are the person, and you're dealing with your scene partners and the situation in which you find yourself. And so I had the wonderful luxury on this movie of being able to see stuff in the final product that I didn't even realize I'd been doing.
And one of the choices as well is more of an exterior one, is the mustache and the facial hair. And I know that there was a bit of a journey with the choice that you made originally and then having to change what that was because of shooting another project with Guillermo del Toro. And so what was behind the original visual choices that you wanted for the character, and then how you had to readjust it and still make it work?
I had grown this monster beard and I really it was all planned out. That I would do the film with Posse. I'm just trying to figure out how it worked. I was going to do Guillermo's film almost 6 months before Potsy's movie, before Old Henry, but then Guillermo's movie got postponed in the middle of production. The rest of the movie got postponed, my part, because of COVID. And so I had this enormous beard that I was growing for Potsy's movie, for Old Henry, because I thought, well, if he's trying to hide who and what he is, then the best disguise possible would be this big, thick beard. And Potsy agreed. And we thought, well, and if it doesn't work out and I get down to Nashville and it seems like maybe we should lose the beard, it's always easier to shave it off than to have to put a fake one on. And I didn't want to put a fake one on. And so I talked to Guillermo and said, I'm growing this beard, but I think it'll work for Nightmare Alley. And he was all for it and said, maybe if we can trim it a bit. And I said, yes, absolutely, we can trim it a bit. But then for reasons I can't divulge, he changed his mind. And he changed his mind while I was in Toronto. in quarantine. And then he wanted me to lose the mustache too. And I didn't want to have a glued on mustache for old Henry, because it's really inhibiting to have a glued on mustache as an actor. I sound like I'm a whinging jackass when I say that, but it really does. It itches and it restricts the way you move your mouth. And if you're playing a large role day in and day out, it's just not good. At least for me, it's not. It would have been a real problem. And so I had this negotiation that with Guillermo about keeping the mustache, and thankfully he allowed me to. And so suddenly old Henry had no beard. And Potsy and I are thankful for that, because we like the look that we came up with. And I get to work with this. I have this wonderful hair and makeup collaborator named David Atherton, who's just a fantastic makeup artist. I've done about a dozen movies with him. And he studied acting when he was in college. And his thesis in graduate school was on makeup and its interaction with the process of acting, because that had been his background. And so this is a guy, almost more than anyone with whom I've ever worked as a makeup artist, who just knows how to work from an actor's inside out to create character. And when he and I work, he always comes down with me a few weeks before principal photography. And we just meet every day and just take a slow process to developing the look of a character. And so I owe a tremendous amount to him as well.
And jumping back to the way that we get to explore the story and this character, through your performance and Potsy's direction, there is a reveal to your character and a little bit of an interesting twist that comes later in the film. But actually, the film isn't about what that twist and what that information is. It really just comes across like an intimate character portrayal. And was it important to both of you that that really be the experience that audiences have and the way that we step into the world of this character?
Yeah, I mean, I think when one plays a historical figure in a genre movie, and particularly a genre like the Western, which deals with heightened reality, there's a triangulation that occurs between the verisimilitude toward the historical figure, the heightened reality of a genre in which the character is really also bigger than life. Bullets are going to be shot at him and they miss somehow. And and the quick draw and all that stuff, all the tropes of a Western, there's a balance you have to achieve. And that was exciting for Potsy and me to try and find, because it ultimately has to be believable when you find out who the guy really is, that he is that guy. And I'm not Billy the Kid. I'm a little shrimp from Oklahoma, who I was in school till I was 26 when you count graduate school. I'm not obviously an outlaw, gunslinging outlaw. And so, there was a distance to go. And then finally, you're personalizing the character and finding him inside of yourself. And so you have those 3 points: yourself, the heightened reality of the genre, and the actual historical figure. And you try to find where it exists, the character exists between those 3 places in the context or the vocabulary of the movie that the director is making.
And There's an interesting moment early in the film when he first comes across the character of Curry, and Curry's been injured quite badly and shot. And there's actually a real tenderness from Henry in that moment when he discovers the wound. And so I was interested for you in what that moment of almost like quietness and tenderness against some of the violence that comes in the film and his relationship with that and his history with violence, what that moment kind of said to you about the character when you were first working with the scripts.
Well, that came from two places. One was that the historical figure whom it's revealed I'm ultimately portraying had a very loyal and caring side to him, even though he was a bit of a motherfucker. And then also, in my superannuated version of that character, I've now parented a kid, and I'm also a widow who very much loved his wife. And so, and took over for her. And so he's caring in certain ways that made that moment feel right.
Mm-hmm. And his relationship with his son is interesting in a lot of ways because you said he's a single parent raising his son. There's clearly a lot of love there, but there is also a moment where we see him really combative with his son and we see him slap him. But a lot of his behaviors are about protecting his son first and foremost. So there's a real dichotomy between the parent that he wants to be and who he actually is at his core. And so did you feel like that gave you a lot of space to play within him as a character?
I did, but he's a character, he's a dad in 1906. And so slapping a kid is, this is not something I do with my children. But this was a different time. And Potsy's making an unapologetic meat and potatoes Western that examines not only how violence ramifies, but also at its heart, it's a father-son relationship. And this was a spare the rod, spoil the child sort of a parenting ethos. And so that slap moment was absolutely a loving moment in its way. It's wrathful, and it comes out of rage, but that's the way kids were raised back then. Not saying it's right, but that's what it was.
And we learn right at the beginning that, when we meet your character and he's living on the land and he's developed a life for himself as a farmer, that isn't his initial genesis. We know that right at the beginning. And so when you were figuring out what his relationship was with working on the farm, working with tools, and his relationship with the land around him that him and his son live on in a really isolated space, how did that inform the way that you thought about that relationship dynamic for him?
The father-son relationship was really my way into the movie, because I, with my wife, am raising 3 boys, although 2 of them are now in college. And what I love about acting can best be described with what I love about narrative fiction, whether I'm reading a novel or watching a play or acting in a play or writing a film, that these are narrative fiction is a rehearsal for life. That's what we do. That's why we like reading a novel. That's why we like going and sitting in the dark in a movie theater or live theater. We get to for a couple of hours live these lives in front of us through empathy, and it costs us nothing, but we come out all the better for having done it if the narrative does its work. as an actor, the privilege for me is getting to do that in a much deeper way, because playing a part can also be a rehearsal for life. You get to, at no ultimate cost to you, real cost, you get to embody this life and face myriad predicaments and challenges, and learn from them. And so this was like, in a lot of ways, because the movie centers around a relationship between a father and son, it was like rehearsing parenting. And I loved that. It was a privilege to go to work every day and get to explore these extreme circumstances. And so the isolation, the privation, the violence, I just looked at it all as a manifestation of how lucky I was to get to pretend and, come out at the end of it, hopefully, a deeper person and maybe even a better parent.
And when it comes to stepping between lead roles and supporting roles, there's a way that you've described it that I thought was incredibly interesting, which is that it actually impacts the way that you have to shape their journey. Because if you're coming in for just a few scenes in a movie, obviously you have to make faster choices. The arc has to develop much more quickly. And then when you look at a character like this, we really get the opportunity to relish that slow build and that slow journey. And so is that something where when you're developing a character and making a lot of those choices that you're thinking very consciously about the elements of growth that need to happen throughout each of the scenes, or is that just a natural byproduct of what you find with your scene partners from all the development that you've done beforehand?
I think playing a lead role for me, underscores one of the most difficult parts of film acting. And when I look back at some of the roles I played, particularly early on, and I get self-critical, which is a good thing. I'll often say, in that scene, you're ahead of where the character should be. You didn't quite place him where he is inside the story, either emotionally or physically. There's a moment in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where we meet the Cyclops, John Goodman's character, and Pete has just been turned into a toad, or at least that's what I believe, and he's in the shoebox at the table, and in the scene right before, I'm mourning him, and I'm very upset, and I'm utterly distraught because this is my best friend, Pete, and I'm convinced he's a toad. And then Joel and Ethan said, okay, we want to do this special shot of you that shows the Cyclops's, John Goodman's character's recognition that you're just a complete dunce. And so they gave me the piece of direction. Okay, that's the purpose of this. So just kind of look at him and be completely in his thrall as if you're mindless. And so I did, and they laughed and they thought it was funny. And I felt very proud of myself. And then I saw the first cut of the movie. Not even the movie. They showed me that scene. I went down to their office to say hi while they were editing. And they showed me that cutaway, and it felt utterly wrong. I just felt like, I'm mourning, and I have this grin on my face, and it doesn't work. And they loved it. And then when I said, I'm mourning Pete, and they just thought that was so funny that I was that I was distraught over this. And Ethan told me, well, at that moment, there's no way we were going to cut it, because it was so funny how distraught you were. But I still look at that moment and I feel like I could have given them what they wanted and played the continuity of the character. And there's a whole host of examples I could come up with in movies I've done where I just didn't get the continuity right. When you have a lead role, it just gets more difficult because you have more scenes to play, and so there are just more opportunities for you to fuck up in that regard. And so as I've gotten older, what I do now, which has been really, really helpful, is I learn an entire part, no matter how big it is, before I even shoot the first part. And so that there was that Elvis Costello on one of his tours had this wheel, and they would spin the wheel, and whatever song it landed on, they'd play that song. And so I like to be able on a movie set now to know the whole part so well that the director could say, we're going to shoot scene 56 today. And I would say, got it, and be able to do it. And that has really helped me orient myself inside of a role over the reality of the fact that you shoot movies out of order, because the schedule is more location based than it is chronological.
And then
That
lastly,
was a long answer.
but it was such a brilliant answer. And lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about your process and how you choose projects, because you've described it as something where there's kind of almost a checklist where it's not just, okay, I have a gut instinct and I really want to do this role. It's I need to feel like I can bring something to this character that nobody else can. I need to really trust in the director's vision and support that. But the last point that you've made that I thought was really fascinating is that part of it, you said, is also about making sure that the producers are going to support the director's vision. And that I thought was really interesting, because there's so many times where a director has a specific vision but doesn't get the opportunity to execute it in the way that they want. And so when you're having early conversations and you're primarily talking to the director, how do you navigate trying to ensure that that last point is going to be part of your checklist before you say yes to a role?
Ideally, without being a jerk about it, I love meeting the producers and just making sure that they're going to support what the director wants to do. Now, obviously, producers can't just give the director everything he or she wants and leave it at that, because it's an expensive medium to accomplish. And there are limits, and I've faced those as a director, certainly. But I just don't want to be on a set where the producer is almost like a linebacker. Terrence Malick, I was talking with him when I was having trouble with a producer years ago, and he used that metaphor, which I thought was great. Is, you don't want the producer to be like a linebacker when you've just broken through the line with the and they're trying to block you or tackle you before. It's just the opposite of what you want. You want the producers to be helping you draw up plays or drawing up plays for you to succeed, and making sure the blockers are there. You want them to be on offense with you. And so I like to know that a director is going to have the support of the people around him or her. I've just been on sets where that wasn't the case, and it's unbelievably heartbreaking and demoralizing, not only to the actors, but more importantly, to the crew. And your heart is breaking for the director, who seems to, be at odds with people who should be helping him or her.
Well, with everything with Old Henry, I really love everything that you've done and brought to your performance in it. I think it's a really special film because of that. So congratulations on everything with the movie. And thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure to talk to you.